Well, love is a powerful and awesome thing, isn't it? Love makes the world go round, so they say. Did you hear about the love letter that Marie wrote to her former fiancé, Jimmy? Here's what the letter said. Dearest Jimmy, no words could ever express the great unhappiness I've felt since breaking off our engagement. Please say you'll take me back. No one could ever take your place in my heart. Please forgive me. I love you, I love you, I love you. I'll be yours forever, Marie. P.S. Congratulations on winning the lottery this week. What motivates love? Compare that with a poem written by Ruth Harmstalken called I Wonder. You know, Lord, how I serve you with great emotional fervor in the limelight. You know how I eagerly speak for you at Women's Club. You know how I effervesce. What does that mean? How I effervesce when I promote a fellowship group. You know my genuine enthusiasm for you at Bible study. But I wonder how I would react. I wonder if you pointed to a basin of water and asked me to wash the calloused feet of a bent and wrinkled old woman, day after day, month after month, in a room where nobody saw and nobody knew. I wonder. Love. We talk a good game. We speak a lot about love, but do we put love in action? I remember a poetic phrase of C.S. Lewis where he said, we talk of love, a scholar's parrot may talk Greek, but self-imprisoned, we always end where we begin. Jesus, however, puts his actions where his words are. Jesus shows us love in action. Now, Jesus says, is the Son of Man glorified. He's heading to the cross. At Christmas, God in Jesus was born to us. And at Christmas, Jesus, God to us, became vulnerable and accessible. But in the crucifixion, God in Jesus Christ became the embodiment of forgiving love. Threat, fear of judgment, may cause you to straighten up and fly right for a little while. But glorious love in Jesus' forgiving grace stirs a gratitude and a love and a trust in Jesus that lasts a lifetime. Which is more powerful, threat of judgment or the inviting love of God that he gives to you in Jesus Christ? Threat may be short-term effective, but love, unconditional, consistent, everyday love, wins the heart and transforms life. So when we speak of glory, we're not talking about glory in the sense that our culture usually does, where someone is basking in the glory of victory, like the Vikings, who are now going to win the Super Bowl because of the draft. I'm not going to mention it, but basking in the glory like culture usually defines it, right? Where you triumph. Instead, Jesus paradoxically reveals a glory in sacrifice on Calvary, where God in Jesus Christ stoops low to embrace you and me in our brokenness and in our dirtiest darkness and says, even now, I love you and I do not reject you. That is glorious, sacrificial love. In the 17th century, Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector of England, sentenced a soldier to be shot for his crimes. The execution was going to take place in the evening when the ringing of the bell happened to signal curfew. However, the bell did not sound. The soldier's fiancée had climbed up into the belfry and clung with her own hands to that large pendulum so that it would mute the sound of the pendulum to keep the bell from sounding. No bell sounded that night. So Cromwell summoned this woman and asked her to give an account of her actions, and she begged for her lover's life and for mercy. And so Cromwell said, "Your lover shall live because of your sacrifice, her bloody and bruised hands." And so he said, "The curfew shall not ring tonight, nor your lover lose his life." Glorious, sacrificial love. It's a story of a mother who had a wonderful relationship with her teenage daughter. But, you know, have you ever driven down the street and your children became teenagers? I remember in Forest City, I was driving down Main Street, and my son's friends were along the sidewalk. All of a sudden, he ducked down. I said, "What are you doing, Luke?" He said, "Oh, Dad, my friends were there. I didn't want to have them see me riding down Main Street with you." I said, "What?" Anyway, this mother has a teenage daughter who is not only because of her age ashamed to be with her mother, but her mother had terribly burned, scarred hands. She said, "I'm embarrassed to be with you." That hurt her mother right to the heart. But the father explained to the daughter, "When you were a baby, our house had a fire. And your mother rushed into the house, into your room where you were in your crib, and picked you up and rescued you, running you out of the house. And ever since that day of rescue, she has borne the scars of that heroic moment." Those ugly scars are testimony to her love for you. A great sacrifice, glorious love. There's a story about a father, his son, and his friend. There was a young preacher who in his Sunday worship had welcomed an old pastor like me to come and to share a few thoughts. And so the old pastor went to the podium and began to talk about a day where a father and his son took a friend out sailing off the coast of California in the Pacific Ocean. But a storm came up quickly and capsized the boat, even though the father was an experienced sailor. And all three of them were in the water, and the father had a lifeline that he was going to throw, but he only had time because the two boys were far enough away where he only had time to throw it to one. And the father knew that his own son loved Jesus and believed in him. But he also knew that the friend didn't believe in God, didn't know Jesus. So he yelled into the darkness over the wind, "I love you, son!" And he threw the lifeline to his son's friend. And his own son disappeared under the waves in the darkness, and they never recovered his body. And then he went on to say that that love of the father to allow his son to die was like the love of God in sacrificing his own son Jesus. Well, there were two little boys in the church audience that day, teenage boys, who came up to the old pastor after the service and said, "Well, that was a nice story, Pastor, but it's kind of an illogical, unrealistic story, don't you think? Because no father would really throw a lifeline to a stranger, the friend of his son, and let his own son die, would he?" And the old pastor said, "Well, it sure does remind me of how God let Jesus die for you and for me so that we could be forgiven." And he said, that story happens to be true because I was that father. And your past was my son's friend. Sacrificial, glorious love is illogical. But don't you ever take lightly the forgiveness of sins in the name of Jesus Christ that was gained for you when Jesus said, now is the day, now is the time, now is the moment for the Son of Man to be glorified. Frederick Buechner, the famous Presbyterian pastor, said that when Jesus, the Son of God, died, it was a moment of magnificent defeat. Because in that moment, you and I were reconciled to God through Jesus Christ. But then there's more to this passage. For Jesus says, now I give you a new commandment, that you would love one another as I have loved you. Well, what is it like to love like Jesus? We can name a few things. That love is always going to be selfless, which true love always is, right? Love is always selfless. It's always going to be sensitive to the other. It's always going to be willing to serve the needs of the other above myself. I'm not very good at that by nature. It's always going to be sacrificial, and it's always going to be forgiving and faithful. How often do our hearts ache because we love and the persons we love are not faithful? Or life happens so that those that we love are hurt deeply. People of God, the call of Jesus for us to love each other faithfully is what provides the cohesion that allows God to heal and bless lives. So when we love like Jesus, sometimes it's very mundane and ordinary stuff of life. Like Jesus washing the disciples' feet, maybe mundane love is like a husband who, without his wife asking, washes the kitchen floor. Now there's a miracle for you. Or maybe it's like having to pick up undies and socks around the house for the little feet that scamper. Or maybe it's the love of a parent who cares for a sick child and cleans up after the child at 3 a.m. and comforts the child. Or maybe it's the willingness to scrub a toilet. Or boys, put the toilet seat lid down. Love is expressed in mundane details of life. Love is often expressed in the most intimate of relationships. Not long ago, Denise and I were talking about an important aspect of our shared life, and we had a differing perspective on that issue. And she shared her heart with me as we sat at our table together in the kitchen. And like the loving, devoutly Christian husband that I am, I increased my volume and informed her why her feelings were wrong, why her perspective was illogical, why her convictions were foolish. And she said something about not wanting to upset me or make me angry, to which I said, "I'm not angry." She said, "I don't want to disappoint you, but that is how I feel." And in a few minutes, I had to go find her in the house. And I had to tell her that my attitude was arrogant and dismissive and insensitive and disrespectful. And could she forgive me? Because I wanted to value her heart. And she forgave me. She knows all about sacrificial love. There's a book written by John Johnson called Courage in the Face of Fear, where he tells the story of a young student in 4th grade named Ted. Ted's teacher is a woman named Miss Thompson. The reports on Ted were that he was turned off at school, always sloppy in his appearance. His expression on his face was flat. He was unattentive almost continually. Even Miss Thompson seemed almost to have a little delight to pull out her red pen and start making check marks on his paper where it was red, where it needed to be red, where Ted was wrong. But she should have looked more closely at Ted's records. In 1st grade it said, Ted shows promise with his work and attitude, but his home situation is poor. In 2nd grade it said, Ted could do better, but his mother is seriously ill and he gets no help at home. In 3rd grade it said, Ted is a good boy, but way too serious, a slow learner, his mother died last year. And in 4th grade, early on, it said, Ted is very slow, well-behaved, but his father shows no interest in him whatsoever. Well, Christmas arrived, and the children brought presents for each other and exchanged gifts, and they brought presents for their teacher, and Ted brought a crumpled up brown sack, taped together, and inside, as Miss Thompson opened it up, it was a bottle of really cheap perfume from the dime store, and a cosmetic plastic bracelet that had several missing stones from that bracelet. And the children laughed at Ted's gift. But Miss Thompson acted like she'd just won the lottery. Marie should write her a letter. And she, to the astonishment of the children, took the perfume and put it on and put the bracelet on her wrist. And after class, Ted stayed around and he said, Miss Thompson, I'm glad that you like my present because my mom died a year ago and she loved this perfume too, and it was her favorite, and when you wear it, I think of my mom. And Miss Thompson, at the end of class that day, prayed that Jesus would forgive her for her lack of love toward children who struggle academically, including Ted. She said, could you begin to let me have love, especially for those that need that extra attention? And lo and behold, Ted began to improve in his academic work as Miss Thompson showed him more attention in the class. Well, years passed, and Miss Thompson got a note from Ted. It said, Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know I'm graduating 2nd in my class. Love, Ted. 4 years later, another note from Ted saying, I'm graduating 1st in my class. University wasn't easy, but I liked it. Wanted you to know. Love, Ted. 4 years later, dear Miss Thompson, can you believe it? Today I'm Theodore Stollard, MD. How about that? I wanted you to know. By the way, I'm getting married next month. Would you be willing to come and sit where my mother would sit if she were alive? You're the only family I know. My dad died last year. Why am I sharing these stories with you? Because if love is going to be like Jesus, it has to be lived out in real life relationships. Not when it's convenient, not when I feel like it, not when you make me look good or you have something I want, so I'll be kind to you. But God help us with Jesus in our lives, that we would show people the type of love that Jesus shows to us. I'm going to share one more story. And actually, I love this story, so forgive me if I already shared it with you here, it's good to hear it again because I have told this story many times. In May of 2001, the Houston newspaper, the Houston Chronicle, had a front page with a picture of a woman in a strange position. The picture on the screen has a woman with a stethoscope, but the woman in the picture, which I couldn't find, was of a woman with her head laid on the chest of a young man that she had just met a few minutes before. You see, that woman's son had died that week, and that young man had received her son's heart. And when she met him, she asked, "Could I listen to my son's heartbeat one more time?" And so she listened to her son's heartbeat that had given life to another young man who would have died if it weren't for the donation of her son's heart, tragic though the loss was. Now, two things I want you to remember in this last story. One is, I do not have the capacity to love like Jesus unless the Lord of the universe does a heart transplant and places the heart of his Son, Jesus Christ, in me. And the second thing I want you to think about is, if God laid his head on your heart today, would he hear the heartbeat of his Son? Does the heart of Jesus beat within you? For the whole purpose of what God wants to do is to plant the heart of his Son in your heart, in your life, so that your life shines and radiates with the love of Jesus Christ, so the world would know that our Father in heaven loves us.